So we've arrived at the final chapters of Abraham's story. And wow, is it a dramatic conclusion. This is where it all comes together, the fulfillment of a promise that was decades in the making, and get this, one of the most intense tests of faith you'll find anywhere.
And right away, this story makes you ask a pretty uncomfortable question. What if our greatest heroes are, well, deeply flawed? I think we often want our heroes to be perfect, right? But the biblical narrative gives us something way more raw and honestly, way more real. It gives us people who are complex, people who stumble, and whose faith is literally forged in the fire of their own mistakes. And Abraham, he is Exhibit A.
And we see this flaw pop up almost immediately as we get into these final chapters. You'd think, after everything he's been through, Abraham would have learned his lesson by now. But nope. In a moment of pure fear, he makes the exact same staggering mistake he's made before. Okay, so he gets to this Philistine city, Gerar, and what does he do? He gets scared for his life, so he lies to the king, Abimelech, and says his wife, Sarah, is just his sister. Again, the source material points out that this wasn't just a one-off slip-up. It was a recurring pattern for him. And this is so important because it reminds us that these figures aren't these perfect cardboard heroes. They're real people with real fears, just like us. And this is where the story throws this huge, ironic curveball at you. After the whole lie gets exposed, Abraham, the guy who was still waiting for God to fulfill the promise of his own son, prays for King Abimelech's household so that they can have children again. I mean, think about that. He's acting as a source of blessing for others, right in the middle of his own long wait.
But that long wait, that unfulfilled promise, is about to change everything. This next chapter brings the laughter of a promise finally fulfilled, but it also brings the heartbreak of a family being torn apart. After a quarter of a century, the moment is here.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It really puts the weight into perspective, doesn't it? 25 years. A whole generation passed between the original promise and Isaac's birth. They even tried to take matters into their own hands with Ishmael. But God's plan had its own schedule, and it was a slow one. Abraham is 100 years old and Sarah is 90 when this miracle baby finally shows up.
So it makes perfect sense that they name him Isaac, which means he laughs. It's a name that came from their own disbelief, remember Sarah laughing at the idea? But now it's a name of pure joy. But you know, not everyone in the house was laughing. The birth of this promised son created a really deep and frankly dangerous crack in the family.
Here's what happens. At a big feast for Isaac, Sarah catches his older half-brother Ishmael mocking him. Now the Hebrew word used here is actually a play on Isaac's own name, laughter. But you might think, oh, it's just sibling rivalry, kids being kids. Not according to the source material. This was seen as persecution. It was a genuine threat to the heir of the promise. For Sarah, this wasn't a game. It was a life-and-death issue for the future of God's entire covenant.
And so the family splits right down the middle. But what's really important to see here is that God doesn't just abandon Ishmael. Both sons have a destiny. Isaac is the one-of-a-kind son of the covenant, who will marry within his own people. But God also tells Abraham that Ishmael, who ends up marrying an Egyptian, will also become a great nation. They're on two very different but divinely overseen paths.
And just when you think the promise is secure, just when the laughter has finally filled the house, Abraham is faced with the ultimate test, the binding of Isaac. And it starts with a command from God that is just so shocking, it's hard to even wrap your mind around it. God says, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go, sacrifice him there." Just listen to that language. The repetition is intentional. He's not just a son. He's the only one, the beloved one, the son that every single one of God's promises rests upon. And the command is to sacrifice him. For 3 days, 3 agonizing days, Abraham travels with Isaac toward Mount Moriah. Can you even imagine the silence, the weight of that journey? Every single step bringing him closer to doing this impossible thing, a choice that seemed to make God's command go to war with God's own promise. This moment is so critical in Jewish tradition that it has its own name, the Akada. It's a Hebrew word that literally means the binding. It's a single word that captures this entire earth-shattering moment when Abraham binds his son on that altar.
So what was the point of all this? Was God trying to find out if Abraham was faithful? No, not at all. An all-knowing God already knew what was in Abraham's heart. The test wasn't for God, it was for Abraham. It was his chance to discover for himself the true depth of his own faith, to put that faith into action when everything was on the line.
When you boil it all down, the test comes down to this one massive question.
Do you love the gift, this long-awaited miracle son, more than you love the giver of that gift? Abraham had to decide who he trusted, who he loved, most of all.
And we actually get this little clue about his decision before he even climbs the mountain. He tells his servants, "Stay here, we will go worship, and then we will come back to you." Did you catch that? Plural, we. Later on, the book of Hebrews explains this meant Abraham believed so strongly in God's promise that he figured if he had to go through with it, God could and would just raise Isaac from the dead. I mean, that is just staggering faith.
So after passing this unbelievable test, Abraham spends his final years focused on securing the legacy he was promised. He shifts from this moment of intense faith to the practical, tangible acts of ensuring the future.
And he does two really crucial things. First, after Sarah passes away, he buys the cave of Machpelah. Now, this is way more than just a burial plot. It's his first legal claim to the land, like a physical down payment on the promise that his family would one day possess all of it. And second, he makes sure the lineage stays pure. He sends his servant on a huge journey to find a wife for Isaac from back home from his own people, not from the local Canaanite tribes.
And then, at the age of 175, Abraham's incredible journey comes to an end. And in this really poignant, touching moment of reconciliation, his two sons, the rivals, Isaac and Ishmael, they actually come together to bury their father, bringing that fractured family full circle, at least for a moment, to honor him.
You know, earlier in his life, Abraham had built an altar and called on the name of the Lord, El Olam. It means the eternal God. And that name just perfectly sums up his entire journey, doesn't it? He learned, through decades of waiting and testing, to trust a God who exists outside of time, which means his promises are just as eternal, just as unbreakable as he is.
So in the end, Abraham's story shows us that faith isn't just something you have. It's a dynamic trust that gets tested, stretched, and ultimately proven in the hardest moments of life. It leaves all of us with a question to chew on, really. What does it actually mean for faith to be proven? And what are the tests in our lives that reveal what we really believe?